Today, we are going to talk about living your rhythm or living into your rhythm, dancing to your inner drumbeat. I'm Deborah Henson-Conant. I'm a composer and a performer. I am here with Kathleen Wiley, who is a Jungian psychoanalyst. We both play the harp, so we call this Jung at Harp. And each week, we come up with a question that we want to explore, and we explore it together in this conversation with you. So, Kathleen, you are the one who suggested this topic. What are you thinking about it?
Well, of course, we know how important rhythm is in music.
Right.
I mean, right?
Yes.
And I'm doing an essential embodiment practices circle. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to be moving to the practice of the rhythmic breathing. And so I've been thinking a lot about how central rhythm is into how our body, mind, psyche, souls work. And so it occurred to me that we've been talking a lot of, we're always talking about how do we really get in touch with our authentic self and live it. And if we're going to be in touch with our authentic self, we have to begin to be able to identify our own natural rhythms and learn how to work within those continuums.
Oh, I love all these words you're saying. All these words are coming up. Continuum. I mean, that is part of what is so powerful about rhythm. It is. I mean, I always tell when I break down a musical arrangement, I say that there's three roles in music. Mm-hmm. There's bass, the bass role that moves things along, which gives you the harmonic rhythm. There's the accompaniment, which adds sort of the atmosphere and the character, and there's the melody. And rhythm is in every single one of them. So it's not like that's a separate aspect or a separate role. And when you said the word continuum, of course, time is this continuum. And yet, when we have a rhythm, we are connecting in with it. We are connecting in with the downbeat of that. And that, I mean, one of the things that I love about that, I had my big existential panic attack when I was, I don't know if everyone has it, but my first I had when I was about 13 or 14. And it was all about time. It was about, time, I'm here now, but what was here, 10 years ago, and what was here, were there dinosaurs, like I just had this sort of existential, like, where it goes out. And I felt like I couldn't even hold on to time, or it was just like I was in this, like if you're under a wave. Rhythm allows us to connect. And it's really interesting because yesterday I was in a class and I got really nervous because I couldn't find something. And anytime I can't find something, I get all nervous. And so, it was in a music class. And we were exploring this progression. Let's see, I have to pull this down. We were exploring the progression A, G, F, G. So it was this very simple progression. You can play it on all the white keys of the piano. And even just doing this right now, the minute I started setting up that rhythm, the repetition, the continuum, I could feel my panic going away. And then when I sang what I was doing, it was like I was floating on that rhythm, and I came back to myself in that rhythm, so it brought me back to me. And I could feel that happening even as I did it. And it was such a simple thing to do. It's just, literally, if you have a harp, you put your bottom finger on the A and your top finger on the E, or if you have a piano, same thing. And you just take that shape and you take it down 3 steps and you come back up. So in a way, it's like a day or an hour or a moment or a year or maybe even a lifetime. It's that sense that you said of continuum. And yet on that continuum provides the foundation for creativity. and it gives that continue. All right, so that was my little, I don't even know what I spun off of except for the word continuum, which also implies connection.
Yeah, and you're saying something that is so true for us in all areas of our life. Just like in music, when you find the rhythm, you find that the rhythm is the continuum between two poles. In this case, with that progression, it was between the pole of A and the pole of F.
Right,
And
that's
the
right.
rhythm happened between those two poles. And when we come back to the rhythm of our own nature, we do feel less anxious, just like when we find the musical rhythm. So, for instance, there are people who are extroverts, they gain energy by interacting with other people. There are people who are introverts, they gain energy by being alone. And we all, to some degree, are a little bit of both. So if we are going to not feel panic in our life, we have to honor where we are in any given moment of time on that continuum, for instance, of extroversion or introversion. That's just one example. I mean, receiving and giving is another continuum. The breath with inhale, taking in, exhale, letting go is a continuum. There are these polar opposites. And when we begin to understand that principle is at work, it's at work in our emotional nature. Jung talked about it in the language of saying that it's the law of compensation, that the principle of rhythm manifests in the law of compensation, i.e., something goes up, it's got to come back down. How does that translate in our energy system? We have this really creative burst. We work and work and work. We create. We give birth, and then we fall flat, and we feel like a letdown afterwards. I hear this so many times from creative people. It's a compensation. And if we understand that the life happens in the rhythm, the movement between those two poles, then when the collapse or the letting down happens, instead of saying, oh my God, what's wrong? And panicking, we're like, of course, this is the compensation for all that I just put out there. And if I can be present in this, then another creative burst comes. It is like waves, high tide, low tide. But our ego gets attached to whichever of those sides are most comfortable to us, or whichever of those our ego thinks is more valuable. But in truth, to live our rhythm, we have to realize that both poles have their place.
It's interesting because as you were talking, I was thinking a bunch of things. The first thing I thought was, oh, so this is about being where you are, for one thing, like if you're on the A chord, being there. But then it has to do, you were talking about the breathing, and I was thinking about, the breathing out and breathing in. But then I was arguing with it. I was saying, but wait a second. I mean, what I love about my garden is every year it's grown to something bigger. So then I started thinking about, okay, well, when I'm building a solo, yeah, this is the rhythm, or this is the harmonic rhythm that I'm using, or I may add even more, maybe a bossa to that. But what I'm building is so I was building a solo, and the solo has its own rhythm. It has its own build and I wouldn't say fall back, but return. So there's I guess I'm thinking about it as a exploration and then a return, because I'm also thinking that over time, this rhythm gives me a foundation on which to build, whether I am building more wealth, or I am building a solo, or I am building a deeper connection to myself.
Right.
Something is building on top of that rhythm that you're talking about, the breathing out and breathing in, or the tides. So it's almost like it's almost like that rhythm becomes a body itself that starts to have an existence.
Well, what I would say is that the rhythm is like the life pulse. I mean, our subtitle today is Dancing to Your Inner Drum, and the drum is connected to the heartbeat. So, and the heart throughout the ages has been considered to be a symbol of our subconscious, or all that lives in us that our ego has not shaped. And so when we are paying attention to and tuned in to this whole reservoir of who we are, that our heart represents and connects us to, then we are able to move with a rhythm that is the foundation that does then different ways, like the embellishment of the melody that you put, the bossa that you put over the basic rhythm. So the rhythm is just a principle that's inherent in any body, both literal physical body, or the body being a piece of music or a chord progression, or the body being the ocean with the tides. So that whole principle of rhythm is considered one of the great alchemical tenets. There are 7 what are called hermetic principles that are said to just be operative in all of life in every plane: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual.
Let's hear them.
Well, I think that would complicate. Maybe
Oh,
we'll do
really?
a series where we'll do one at a time.
Oh, okay. So there's some stuff. Oh, okay, but is rhythm one of them?
Rhythm is one of them, and another one that is related to rhythm is the principle or law of polarity, that everything exists with its opposite. So everything exists with its opposite. That's the principle or law of polarity. And then there's the law of rhythm, that there is this movement between the two. Think about the beautiful grandfather clocks where, the pendulum swings. And if it swings this way, then it compensates and swings back to the same degree. And if we look at the rhythms in nature of the sun rising and setting, or the tides, low tide and high tide, that rhythm slowly changes.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about the word. As you said, the word compensate, I was like, okay, wait a second. What does that word mean? And I was, it has accompaniment in it as well. And so I'm going to need to look that word up, because I have a negative a connotation with compensate. I think that, I'm going to compensate for that. But I have a feeling I've added that meaning to it. That I don't know what the other side of it is. So it swings, and then and what's interesting is that when it swings to this side, it is full of potential for being on this side. And when it gets to this side, it has no more potential for being on this side, but it's full of potential for being over here. So it is like it is like potential is shifting from one to the other. And potential, I think, meaning energy, and energy that kind of connects the past to the future. I mean, potential is an energy that connects. I don't know what it actually means. I know there's a potentiometer, and I don't know what that is, but I'm just talking out. That's the conversation. And by the way, this is reminding me that one day I said to a friend, I wonder if we both talked about something we didn't know about, we didn't know anything about. If we talked about it for half an hour, would we know more about it at the end of the conversation? And we did, actually. Anyway, carry on.
No, I just want to pick up what you said about that the word compensate took you to the word accompaniment, that you connected those etymologically. And I'm thinking about in Jungian psychology, one of the Jung's concepts that's made it out there a lot in the public, in pop psychology and self-help movement, is the idea of the shadow. That, we have our conscious self and who we think we are. Then we have our shadow, all that we don't think we are, but we are, all that compensates what we aspire to be, And
okay.
so, and we're always accompanied by the shadow. People, I always say this to the people I work with. I may say something to you having one thing in my mind, imagining that it will help you feel one thing, and you feel something totally different. That's because everything has a shadow. It is accompanied by that which will compensate it, by the other pole. And of course, the first psychic compensation is our conscious and unconscious. I mean, there is our conscious self, that which our ego is aware of. And then there's the unconscious, all that goes on in us automatically, reflexively, that shapes what comes out of our mouth, that we don't have any idea what it's going to say till it's out of the mouth.
Okay, well, I want to ask something about that. And before I do, I want to ask about the rhythm of the conscious and the unconscious. And before I do, I want to think of a couple things came to me as we were talking. One was the work songs. Work songs being song, even like I've been working on the railroad. Yeah. I mean, whatever the history of that, and what it connotates, it also represents. It represents work, and I don't know. I know there's a whole set of work songs in Irish and Scottish literature, and it's for the rhythm of people to do something together. So that's one thing about rhythm that I know. As you were describing this back and forth, I saw the warp. I saw people working. The other thing that I notice is that rhythm allows us to do things. As we get into a rhythm, it allows us to do things without having to think of every single thing. And then that's epitomized in a routine. So for example, I used to go to my aerobics class, and the aerobics instructor, it was dance aerobics. And the first thing she would do is like, this is what we're going to learn today. And she'd do this really complicated thing. And every single time I would be like, no way, there is no way I'm going to learn how to do that. I'm not going to do it. And by the end of the time, I was doing it. And it was because she broke it down into smaller sections, put it together. And so that I was able to, so at the beginning, all I saw was a complexity of like 25 things. Then it came down to, it was, 4 things and 4 things and 4 things and 4 things, or whatever it was. And then it became one thing that had 4 parts, and one thing and one thing. And then eventually it became 2 things that had 8 parts, and then eventually became one thing that I could follow along with. And this development of the experience of a routine in which a complex thing is experienced as one thing. So when we used to hear about Mozart and also Schoenberg in music school, well, let's just say Mozart, he conceived of a piece as an entirety. We experience it as a series of things that happen in time, but he experienced it as each piece was one thing that then he could notate from back to front or front to back. And that's what started making me think, one of the things started making me think of that, like, as our minds are able to embrace complexity and see things as connected, we are able to see larger and larger things as one thing, and we experience the pulse or the rhythm of them. So I kind of want to go from rhythm to routine. I mean, I'm sure what I'm saying is triggering something for you. I hope.
Well, yeah,
because I want to know what I'm saying.
Yeah, we have lots of routines, don't we? Some of those routines are really life-giving, and then there are times routines can become very life-deadening.
Right, and in that case, the rhythm is seducing us back into that rhythm, often the rhythm of inaction, and shifting the rhythm to one in which we are doing things that we say we want to do.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm thinking about that happens, let's just say, and this happens with any form, and this is a basic spiritual principle, that free-moving spirit, it's like the wind. It can go anywhere. It keeps moving. It may have a moment of stillness, but that doesn't mean it still doesn't have a lot of energy and potential. It's there. What can happen with routines or with belief systems or with any kind of structure, then that life force, that potential gets stymied. And after a while, the routine becomes rote and it becomes lifeless. And we're going through it like zombies. And then we find ourselves kind of walking the procession of the living dead, We aren't really feeling the movement of spirit and the rhythm because the rhythm has become too concretized in the routine. Now, that's the negative aspect of routine. The reality is, for all of us, if we didn't have some routines where we didn't have to be 100% mindful, making choices tuned into the rhythm, we probably wouldn't get a whole lot done during the day. That we need routines to help us move forward. And even if we look at our bodies, our breathing has its own natural rhythm. And our heartbeat has its own natural rhythm. So having the routine, the rhythm that works automatically, that's at this moment my plain definition of routine. That a routine is a rhythm that's become automatic and just goes on its own without any conscious intervention.
Right.
It is the stuff of life.
Well, yeah, and we always, and I know we got a comment here, and I want to look at it, and I want to say this first. We always seem to end up back at this concept of form, of formless taking form in some way, and then also talking about taking form and then becoming rigid within that form. And how as you were talking, I was realizing, if I said to a student or something, if I said, this is an A minor chord and it's an A minor 9, and so you play it like this, and then you play these notes, and then you play this, and so on and so forth. That's kind of prescribing what's happening. But if I say, this is an A and an E, or even just an A and just an A, and then it goes down a step, and then it goes down a step, and then it comes back up a step. And that's the breath. That's one breath of that progression. And now, can you add something with your right hand? Then, and how simple can you make it? Can it be just a single note? Or can you make space in it so that you make space where the left hand is happening not at the same time, but alternating? Then that routine or that progression becomes the foundation for freedom. So one can become the foundation for getting stuck, and the other becomes a foundation for freedom. And I can see that in music, and I'm looking for that, as always, in my life, in other parts of my life. And that to me is the power of something becoming a drumbeat, something that is an idea. When we give it rhythm, it starts to become something that has form that can support us. I just want to say that for myself. An idea, when given rhythm, then has a form that can support us. Let's see what JT is saying. I think it's difficult to describe the concept of rhythm and routine without also considering the concept of tempo and how increasing or decreasing the tempo can allow us to get into a rhythm. Yes. And I love how JT said how increasing or decreasing. So for example, if I'm trying, and if I'm having physical facility, like I can, I might have to do this slowly. If I'm just trying to get the technical aspects of it. But to get the feeling of it, once I have that, I might need to speed it up, although this is the same tempo, but a different feel. I might need to, eventually, once I've connected, I guess there's different tempos for different times of our engagement with something.
Yeah, and with ourselves. I mean, one example that comes to mind for me from that JT's comment is sparking is, for instance, if we're starting to feel panic, then our breathing automatically begins to get shallow and more rapid. So if we work with this principle of polarity, and this idea of compensation vis-a-vis the principle of rhythm, then if I understand that and I'm all of a sudden feel panicky and I check in and my breathing is shallow and rapid, then I can change the tempo of my breath consciously and begin to slow my breathing down, invite it to come from deeper and deeper within my belly so that my lungs begin to fill with air, that I begin to slow my breathing down. That's going to automatically shift and begin to settle the anxiety. So we have an ability with consciousness to intervene with those rhythms and our own nature, that being one example. Another example is people who are prone to angry outbursts. That if you are aware that all of a sudden you're starting to feel your face flush and you're getting hot, then again, if you understand this principle of polarity, there's a continuum and rhythm, you can change that tempo by, again, use your breath and start to imagine cold water going all through your body. Again, working with the imagery to shift the emotion, because Jung says that the emotion and affect immediately in the human psyche is accompanied by an image. Image is the language of the unconscious. So this is why, again, often when, musicians are learning songs, and I've heard this more than once, is make up a story. You say it all the time, make up a story that you want to tell, because the story gives you images that connect you to the emotion that you want to express vis-a-vis your hands on your instrument.
Well, I'm also thinking, as you talked about this, and as JT is talking about tempo, which is both the speed, and tempo also implies that there is something that's moving at a certain tempo that's consistent. And I'm thinking about when I get lost in music, the most important thing I need to do is to stop and to listen, and first find the beat and then find the downbeat and then get the sense of where I am in the beat of the tune. And then I can jump back in. And what you said about breathing reminded me of that. It reminded me of the act of listening. So when I'm just breathing, I'm reconnecting to that rhythm that is always happening. And I'm also thinking about the tempo rather than just following. And if I start playing, I'm going to keep playing faster and faster and faster and faster. And when I get involved or worried, I'm faster and faster. And I can make that choice to connect in. That's what I heard that I really got from what you just said.
Yeah, and it's such a beautiful connection to music. If you're lost in a song, you go back to the rhythm. If you're feeling off center in your life, you're feeling anxious, you're feeling confused, you're feeling kind of outside of yourself, then what's needed is to listen and come back to where you are in your own rhythm at that moment.
Now I know that some people, so listening to our breathing, coming back to that rhythm, as you were talking also, I was just thinking of, oh, is that why people do rosaries, or is that why people, have things that they say over and over and over again? And then I started thinking about, compulsive saying of things over and over and over again, that I'm starting to think of both sides of rhythm and how we use it and how we can use it to connect ourselves and how we can use it to in a rigid way that seems like it should be connecting, but in fact it doesn't. Can you?
Yeah, and so what I will say to that is that when we're using it in a rigid way, then typically what's happened is that instead of being involved from the neck down with our heart and gut actually feeling and experiencing, we're doing something from our head, trying to control it and make it happen.
Okay, so this is all right. So this goes to the principle of practice in the strings of passion, the fifth string, I think, where I explore this and realize we can practice to get something right, which is kind of like this is. That's practicing to get something right. Or we can practice something simple in a way that we can let it get to us. And that means getting totally out of our head and doing it way longer than we think we should, and really letting it infuse us in a way. And so I'm really fascinated by how one thing, like just that progression, it, depending on how we're approaching it, it can either throw us into the almost arrhythmic experience of perfectionism, where we're trying to fix things and get, which is a very chaotic rhythm, versus we can take the same thing and by breaking it down, it can become something that actually supports us. The same idea.
Right.
Now, what are we doing? What are the factors that are going into shifting that? It's the same thing. It is a bass line with a harmony, even a simple one, and a melody and a progression. But it's completely different experience. One, perfectionism, let's do it exactly like this. The other, I've broken it down to its basic components. What's actually happening here? We come back to this a lot too. I can do it in music. And how do I do that in other parts of my life? How can I tell the difference between the unessential complexities that I'm obsessing over and the essential rhythm of what I'm doing that allows me to be present and actually show up?
Yeah, and how you just begin to discern that is by having practices to begin to listen more deeply, so you can discern, has my head taken over and is imposing perfectionism and pulling me out of my body? Or is my head here with knowledge of this progression serving my heart's desire and intention to express what I'm feeling in my gut? So they're very, consciousness is what makes the difference. And how do we experience consciousness, or how do we shift consciousness? One way is through the practice of setting intention. If I come to, say, the Summer Harp Jam and I work with the progressions with the intention of surrendering to my experience of it and connecting with it on a feeling level, so that then when I'm in a jam, it arises spontaneously because I know it on my cellular level as well as my head. That's one experience. But if I come to the Summer Harp Jam and learn the progressions with the intention, okay, I'm going to master this and then I'm in charge and I'll always get it right. I mean, even saying it, I felt the energy just go from, it was a split. And so I think that part of the rhythm that is natural to our body mind is that we have a body mind, not just an intellect and head. And that the rhythm that most needs to be established first for all of us, intended every day, is that rhythm between our head and our intellect and our rational processes, connecting with the heart and the gut and making meaning that's life-giving. What tends to happen is the head, the intellect, and the rational processes have often demonized, poo-pooed, and suppressed the heart and the gut, and then it's off doing its own thing. And talk about one-sided, you get to one side of the pole, and that, from a Jungian perspective, it's always the cause of dis-ease, that one-sidedness.
Yeah, like I'm thinking if a clock stayed up there. So right. As you were talking, I was thinking, this is living your rhythm, dancing to your inner drum beat or your inner drum beat. And I'm thinking about, so we've talked about the now I'm thinking about music. There's little beats, and then there's subdivisions, and then there's larger, and then there's the harmonic rhythm, and then there's the pieces in a suite. So it gets larger and larger. And I'm thinking about how we do that in our day. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, oh, well, one of the things we do every week is we meet here at 9 a.m. We meet with Sarah, our on-air producer, and we we talk about what we're going to do, and then we have this conversation. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know who's going to come, but we have this conversation. And so that is a rhythm that happens every single week.
Right.
I noticed that, and so then we can explore different things, and then now we're exploring a new way of doing this and putting, streaming it in different ways, and now we can pull up people's comments. It's developed. And I noticed, so I clean the cat box every morning. Cleaning the cat box is my sort of like connection, to my, if I've cleaned the cat box, I'm in pretty good spiritual condition that day, or so I think. And it is my relationship to the cats. And I have this whole system, this scruff and sniff system and blah, blah, blah. It's a very complex system. The broom is on the wall and it comes down, but I can do it in about a minute if I do it every day. And it's so interesting to watch it over time, to watch my relationship to this simple service to my cats over time, and begin to see oh, I see, if I sweep the floor, they realize the floor isn't the cat box. And then I see, if I don't put so much litter in the cat box, they realize, I can start to see over time this relationship with these animals through this, this simple practice. And I'm thinking that to really live the rhythm of who I am, is to find all these points and to be pulling them in, just as I would in a solo. I would be going through the progression of the day in a way that it has me grounded, so that I can pull these in, and each one can be like cleaning the cat box as a little embellishment on the morning, and washing the dishes, all these things. And what you're talking about is that ultimately this is about expressing ourselves, and our authentic selves. And I think I realized as I said this that, well, I'm cleaning the cat box, I'm washing the dishes. How creative is that? Am I being a creative artist? But what I'm realizing is that as I really as I allow myself to ground and be supported by the rhythm of my life, it's not that I make myself creative, but that my creativity emerges.
Right. That's right. Yeah, and I want to say what I think you're talking about, like rhythms within rhythms,
Right.
or routines within routines. And so that part of dancing to our own inner drum beat is really knowing what are the rhythms that work for us. So, I think about the basic circadian rhythms that govern our sleep cycles. So if I honor my circadian rhythm, I like to be up at 5:30, in bed by 9:30 or 10. My husband, John, a professional folk musician, the idea of getting up at 5:30 in the morning, forget it. I mean, that's not his rhythm. And so we start with the most fundamentals, honoring our rhythm of how often we need to eat, of how much water we need to drink. Since you mentioned the cat box, honoring the rhythms of elimination. It's like the very basics. We have to start there. Then we can begin to pay attention to our rhythms for our emotional needs, how much alone time we need, how much together time we need with other people, how much time we need in quiet and solitude, and how much time we need in kind of with music in the background. Those fundamentals, we can pay attention to what's our rhythm mentally. Often in our world, people mentally get overloaded because there's constant stimulation, and it's like, gorging on a buffet all day, but none of it gets digested,
Right.
So attending to that rhythm, and so there are all of these kinds of things going on simultaneously. And when we do have an understanding, or aspire to an understanding of this principle of rhythm and the law of compensation, it helps us begin to better appreciate, number one, who we are and how we move. And it also then gives us the needed information if we want to change the tempo. If I want to stay up till 11, then if I pay attention to the law of nature, I'm going to have to gradually shift myself into a new rhythm, just like the cycle of the sun, how much daylight, how much nighttime, like the waves, every 24 hours, high tide, low tide. And having a basic understanding of this principle gives us freedom that we don't
As
have.
as you were talking, and I'm thinking about that rhythm and thinking of bringing up the rhythm in our day and finding it, it reminded me of when I first started playing with a bass player and I first started connecting with jazz. And I remember being in a rehearsal with him, and I remember him saying, "You have to lay back on my rhythm. You have to trust that I'm holding down the rhythm." And that ability to listen and to trust, and I'm realizing that is something important to bring into my life as I if I can find as I not if I can find as I allow myself to create that underlying rhythm that will make space for the things that I'm doing. There's an amount of trust that I also want to experience as I'm doing that. Um, uh, and this is perfect segue to what JT has written. Being grounded enables us to feel and experience all of the life between each of the beats.
That's right.
I don't know that I could say it any better than that. And the grounding for me is to be able to listen as I'm playing. In music, to be able to listen and hear the beat as I'm playing instead of being so obsessed with what I'm doing. And and then bringing that into my life is like what you said. What are the beats of my day? And the idea that at the end of the day, instead of trying to finish everything, that day is over. Now the next day is going to start. And each day I will play it in the way that I will play it with the intention of grounding so that my authentic who I am is going to come forth out of what I'm doing.
Absolutely. And when we move to the beat of our own drum, when we follow our own rhythms, then we are grounded. We get ungrounded when we adapt, and it's usually unconsciously adapt, trying to be something we think someone else wants us to be or something we should be. And so it's the same thing with music. When we can sit down and play the tune, being with ourselves and our own expression of it, it's a totally different song than if we're trying to play it like we think we should.
Yeah, and I want to bring one, and if this may be a whole other subject, I love trying to hear my own drum. I love fellowship. I love following someone. I love dancing, feeling somebody else's rhythm. I love listening, playing with other people and hearing that other rhythm. And so it's interesting. I want to think a little bit more about that during the week about, is there another rhythm that I could listen to that is me? And would I have as much joy following that rhythm as I do following somebody else's rhythm?
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. I mean, that's a perfect note to end on, because when we follow our own rhythm, it allows us to dance with someone else. Because even in fellowship, there is a rhythm of tuning in and receiving and then giving back with our movement.
Right.
There isn't a giving up of self in there, although often people think being following or being in relationship does mean a giving up of one's rhythm. But that's not true relationship, because relationship means two.
Right. And right. And as you follow, as you follow, you're also, giving resonance to what someone's doing. And so it has it becomes part of the movement. It's not only follow it. It's, yeah. Anyway, that's a whole other thing, except that it isn't, because I really want to see if this is, dancing to your inner drum. And I was changing it, dancing to your inner drum beat, but I'm thinking that I want to literally think dancing to this inner drum. And really, what is that follow of that? What is the beauty of being able to follow that movement?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it is exactly what JT said. It allows us to experience all of the life between. You know, Jung says that life happens between the polarities of spirit and matter, between that which is free, moving like the wind, and that which is locked into form, like matter. But life happens between those two. And so, as we can honor our own creative impulses and that in us which just wants to move out without necessarily a specific channel, we can honor that and honor that part of us that likes it just a certain way. Then we begin to live because they're both realities.
So that's why the word dancing in it is here.
Yeah, that's
is
right.
Dancing with that.
It's a dance.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Kathleen, JT, Anne, and everybody else who's watching, and Sarah, our on-air producer, thank you so much. I just love these conversations. I love the comments that we get from people. Thank you for everybody who watches and lets us know that you enjoy these. And Kathleen, I can't wait to see what we're going to talk about next week.
I'm sure it will be rich, and it's great.
Did you say I'm sure it'll be rich?
I'm sure it will be rich. Yeah, it's always great.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thanks, Sarah. And thanks, everyone. Thank you. And until next